Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Webster. I'm the founder, CEO, and CISO for Cyvergence. Today, we're going to look at part two of a primer on the threat landscape. So this is part of the threat and vulnerability series. We've already had part one. We're also going to cover things like vulnerability management, software security, and the list is going to go on as we start to explore more. So what are you going to learn today? The ransomware threat landscape, issues with open source software, the dark web, and some enterprise improvements over time. So part one, you can see what we covered here. We covered the threat landscape, technology context, threat actors, breach patterns, and Cyvergence services. Today, we're going to focus on ransomware, the supply chain threats, the dark web, enterprise state, and Cyvergence services. A bit of housekeeping. We are using very reputable sources, but some information may be contradictory, and some of that could be related to the data sets that are going on. And so every data set being a little bit different may provide some different vision into what's actually happening. So take that with a grain of salt, but just recognize there's no such thing as perfect information. We're doing the best job we can here to present that perfect information. We're going to be moderately technical, but I'm going to try to make this very easy for everybody to understand. There's going to be some high-level explanations, just so people get the general idea of what's happening today. Also keep in mind that this is not an academic treatise. We're not giving exact and specific dates behind a lot of things. We're trying to let people know what some of the generalities are concerning the threat landscape. But let's go ahead and dive right into ransomware. So first, we're looking at the top 10 countries that are targeted by ransomware. United States is always one of the key focus of countries that's out there. I'm sure there's going to be interesting to take a look at the data related to 2023 because there was a new type of ransomware that's sort of similar, but they're using something called wiperware now, and that may affect things a little bit. But you see here the United States is very common, but there are a lot of other countries too. Now, this data set might be a little bit limited, so you're seeing only a few countries, so just keep that in mind. Other countries are targeted by ransomware as well, but the numbers may be a little bit less, but also skewed by the data sources. So top 10 sectors targeted by ransomware. Manufacturing is one of the key ones there, but you see that pretty much everybody is going to be attacked to different degrees when you consider that. And again, this is coming in from ConnectWise in this particular case. But manufacturing is a very difficult area to protect. And a lot of the reason for that is because there are a lot of attackers going after manufacturing because it can be targeted the same way that say a hospital or some of these others can. And they have IoT devices, Internet of Things. So there are things doing work. And if you prevent those things from working, it prevents the production going on. So it's extremely important for organizations today to protect themselves, especially in the manufacturing sector. So this is taking a look at things from a United States perspective. This data is coming from IC3, the Internet Crime Report. So IC3 is an arm of the government, and basically what you do when you submit an incident, the information should be coming into IC3, and then they report on it. So this is, again, the data is going to be a little bit skewed here, but you get the general idea of what's going on. But they have more healthcare and public healthcare places to submit information than what you've seen in the past. And this is a big concern. And like the manufacturing sector, the healthcare sector has a lot of problems here, especially in the United States. There are a lot of IoT devices around every single bed within healthcare. And because of that, they tend to be more targeted. And oftentimes they have multiple ransomware attempts against them every single year because it's very, very difficult to protect. But this just gives you another view. There's a lot of other organizations that are affected by that, a lot of other sectors that are affected, but it gives you an overall perspective on ransomware. The initial access. So typically speaking, it's going to be software vulnerabilities and brute force is the two key things. That's more than 70% of your problems. So dealing with a robust vulnerability management program is going to be incredibly important. And this is coming in from Palo Alto Networks, but we can see here that they're saying that phishing is oftentimes an initial access vector. along with sometimes some previously compromised credentials are used to gain access to it. So you get a general sense of where the problems are and where you need to focus your primary efforts. 4% is going to be other, but so dealing with identity is going to be a very key part of this. But let's take a look at some supply chain threats. Those of you who are not familiar with supply chain, a lot of this is how is the information working? So it's much larger when you're looking at the total supply chain, but when you're looking at the open source part of it, it's huge. There were a lot of types of open source requests over the years. And what it is, it's software that's freely available over the internet. So what companies do is they download that software, they reuse that software for whatever they want to use over a period of time. And what happens is those requests are going up and up and up. You can see here that we're above 4 million requests per year. When you talk about downloads per year, when you're seeing this. So this is something to kind of take a look at, to kind of look at the open source. When you consider that large supply chain, open source is a big part of it. And the reality is it saves companies millions of dollars every year because they don't have to reinvent the wheel because somebody else is already doing the development for them. So it does save time. But with saving time, you're going to bring in some risks as well. And what you're finding is more and more governments are starting to become involved in these supply chain attacks that are occurring. So we can see here that there is a large number of packages. Here we're seeing 245,000 malicious packages are out there in 2023 from the data that they have, more than twice all the previous years that are part of this. So this is from the Sonatype State of the Software Supply Chain. So it gives you an idea. When you talk about open source risks, 1 in 8 have known problems, have known risk as part of that. So that's, again, part of the risk landscape when you're considering an organization. Now, artificial intelligence, that's been making the news on many different levels. Most of us are at least familiar with the concepts today. But you can see here, if you don't think that you're using artificial intelligence, there is a good chance that you are. And the question is, do you have a good governance program concerning the supply chain risks today? And are you sure that you're not utilizing it? Now, in many cases, it's going to be just a built-on feature and add in, but is any data actually going out to the artificial intelligence sources? So things are definitely starting to change in terms of AI today. And it's something that you have to be concerned of. You may think, well, nobody's really using it, or, hey, I've blocked it everywhere. But are you also blocking it when you're considering your web applications that might be having what's called API interface with another website? So they're connecting in automatically to do some work, and ultimately that's going to be part of it. So you have to consider what is your data governance model for using something like AI. For some corporations, it might be perfectly acceptable. Other organizations are going to choose to block it. So here's yet another consideration. But let's take a look at the dark web for a second. We're going to start a little bit slower and go into this. So the surface web, think of the surface web as everything that you're used to looking at. You go to a search engine, you type in something, and you have access to it. You're able to do your basic shopping through there. Most major websites and companies have websites that are available through the surface web. These are just the things that the average user is going to see on a day-by-day basis. But there is a lot more going on than just what we see on the surface web. There's a lot of stuff going on in something called the deep web. Typically speaking, this is legitimate traffic. That information is coming back and forth through the deep web. And what's happening is they're transferring information. Those APIs that I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, they're typically going from one place to another, from one type of company to another. It's how you get some of the supply chain logistics in place for a lot of companies. They have those integrations, so they know if they're low on a product, they're going to automatically do the ordering of a product to make sure that they are always supplied the way that they need to. So this is a big part of what companies are doing today, is they're interconnecting through a lot of the stuff that's happening on the deep web. Again, this is usually legitimate traffic. There's always going to be some exceptions because there are some bad things that are going on out there. And it's the electronic backbone of e-commerce. But also there's the dark web. So you're seeing that, which started in 2002. You're seeing here, though, that it's roughly 6% of the traffic is going to and from the dark web. Typically, what this means is Tor. Tor is a type of browser that it's different from the internet, but allows a lot of traffic to go on. It has a lot of illicit services on there. Now, Tor was originally invented for good purposes for transferring information without some prying eyes within the U.S. government. So it is a U.S. government invention. But since then, it's taken off. It's become free. Anybody can use it. So there are a large number of people. Some of the estimates that I've seen have been 30% of the people in the United States are using Tor for doing things like illicit services, etc. Some of it does have some legitimate purposes, but there's a lot of illegitimate purposes as well when you look at things like the dark web. So a little bit about the dark web history. This is from soscanhelp.com. So this is coming in from the early 70s, was your first illegal online transaction. 1991 is when the internet was open. 2002 is when Tor was released. And it wasn't until 2009 when we saw the first Bitcoin mining. So I want to put that in perspective. When we talk about things like Bitcoin or any of these other cryptocurrencies that are out there, it's helped to fuel a lot of the cybercrime on the dark web and in other places. And the reason why, the money can't be traced the same way you can trace a standard bank transfer. And so when you're talking about something like that, that sort of anonymous way of getting information, it allows a lot more commerce to take place that would not normally have. It's almost like you're able to do a cash transaction, except you're able to do it online and connect with anybody around the globe. So you start to see how this creates a larger issue for the dark web and becomes a little bit more nefarious than what the original use case was for Tor. But let's take a look a little bit at the dark web data lifecycle. You can see that it was used by hackers. It was shared amongst different groups over time. It eventually ends up for sale. Then once it's kind of gone through that market, then the data is leaked for free that's out there. So this is a typical dark web lifecycle, data lifecycle, but it doesn't mean it's the only method. There are some cases the hackers just sell the information right away, or they'll give the information to other groups or sell the information to other groups before it actually goes on an open marketplace. So there's a lot of different routes that the data can take and the methods that they're using. If you think back to the first presentation, we're talking about the types of data. So if you know what type of technology is within an organization, you might understand what the vulnerabilities are, and it gives you an idea how you need to protect it. So this is yet another angle that companies need to think about. But, as I said, I described as Tor and the dark web as somewhat of a marketplace. Well, cybercrime is also a marketplace. In the first presentation, I was talking about the relationship between physical crime and electronic crime. We're seeing the same things here. Credit card information can be stolen and sold over the web. So in some places, you're seeing stuff that'll go for standard credit card up to $110. Banking accounts, up to $60. It just depends. So some of you may be scratching your head, and a lot of this is going to depend on the type of data, what they're able to get access to, how much data is there, and so on. But you see that Gmail accounts are worth 60, and the reason why, usually with a stolen email account, you can go in and get other services. So if the hackers have access to something, they can delete the emails that they're coming in, and then they can go get the information that they're looking for. So it's definitely a huge concern from a lot of standpoints. When you consider things like Facebook or Instagram accounts, those can be used for some nefarious purposes too. Those are worth $25. State ID, roughly in the 160 range. So you get the gist of this overall, but the two last I want to focus on, though, are DDoS, which is distributed denial of service attack. This is where on the dark web, they will perform an attack against another organization for a fee. And they can have this coming in from multiple points, including the dark web. So this is definitely a challenge for organization because it's very difficult for them to protect against it, especially if you're looking at some sort of crowdsource initiative, which sometimes is the case. It all depends on what they're interested in doing. But malware is the other side of the house. If you're looking for malware that might be able to bypass some of the modern sensors, you could pay anywhere from $1,200 to $1,700 for the creation of malware. I'm sure there's going to be exceptional cases where malware is being really created and they spend a lot of time developing it, and that can be for different purposes. but this is generally speaking the information that I could pull up. And there's been a lot of reports about dark web marketplace over the years, but it is a marketplace just like anything else. They just happen to be dealing with services that are illegal in most countries. So the enterprise state, there's been a lot of improvements in cybersecurity over the years, but what we're seeing is things are getting a little bit worse. So you see here the purple is external. Gray is internal. So this is about detection. Was the detection internal or was it external? So you can see here in 2011, almost all of the detections were external. And this is bad because if some other company, or sometimes it's law enforcement or there are other things, is letting you know that you're breached, that's a huge issue because it's going to cost you more to deal with the breach than it would have otherwise. Internal is another part of that equation. So if you have something like an internal detection, you can block it. You can respond to it much more quickly than if somebody else had told you. If they see something happening from a website, well, you've got to go figure out where it's coming from within your network. You may not even have a clue. So it's really important to focus on the internal detection. Right now, for 2022 data, it's roughly 37%. And these numbers obviously change year by year. So another factor that's sort of interesting is what's called the global dwell time. Now, dwell time is a well-known statistic. It's been around for a long period of time. Dwell time is how long is the attacker in your corporation or your environment. The median dwell time right now is 16 days. In 2019, it was 78 days. I was trying to pull up some early reports, but I've seen over 200 days that hackers are typically within an organization for the median dwell time. So this is a big challenge, though. Typically, hackers can go in and get their information within a few days, which is typically what we're seeing here. Usually the dwell time, and this is pulling in information from Mandiant, their MTrans report. Mandiant is a very well-respected forensic response company out there, now owned by Google. But you can see that usually it's within a couple of weeks for most cases when they're dealing with these types of things before they're able to shut it down, and they're in there and then they're out. And so this is important. But you'll notice that there is a small percentage of companies that might have advanced threat attackers in there for a much longer period of time, even years. You can see over on the right-hand side of the chart, you're going up above 2,000 days. So this is definitely concerning when you're looking at this because that means that they can do whatever they want to. That time, showing you where the market was at and showing it was not the last stage, but one of the last stages of the data governance lifecycle, they're selling that information. It means that that's still valid in these cases. So it gives you an idea, the more fresh the information is and more validated it is, probably the better off it is, with the exception of information that's stored out there for an extremely long period of time, like we're seeing here in a few of those cases. So let's take a look at some of the divergence services. Obviously, we have risk services, and all of them are threat informed if that's the direction that you so choose. We're going to take a look at the threat landscape. We're going to analyze it. We're going to figure out how does that affect your particular industry. So we'll look at it from multiple standpoints to say, how should we prioritize those risks for your organization? If you're interested in a threat vector assessment, if you want to understand what your major protections are within your organization and you want to find out how to protect against it, threat vector assessments are a great way to do that. So you can map that across through the threat landscape. That's part of what we do here. If you're interested in virtual CISO services, we can talk about the threat landscape and start to build in the threat landscape into those virtual CISO services. In fact, it's really important because you need to build that credibility and understanding what the risks are and presenting those risks to senior management. Of course, we've got direct sales for threat intelligence platform, threat intelligence data, and so on, if that's the direction you want to go. And there's a lot of indirect sales. It's built into technology, such as vulnerability management services, antivirus, and so on. So there's a lot of things that we can do from that perspective. But just keep in mind that the threat landscape is part of what we need to pay attention to in order to have strong services. With that, I want to thank you. If you liked the presentation, definitely feel free to follow us. There's going to be more information coming up over time, but also follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Facebook. And we look forward to seeing you more in the future. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll talk with you soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.